is Motzei Shabbos Kodesh. Shabbos was the 24th day of the month of Mar Cheshvan. And for those that didn't make it to the shir this afternoon, we are catching up the Amud Daf Samach Amud base of Maseches Pesachim. We are 5 lines down from the top of the Amud. That's where we left off on Erev Shabbos. And the Gemara is asking a question. It says the Gemara as follows: one line from the beginning of the line, one word from the beginning of the line. Ibai lehu. Says the Gemara as follows: Ibai lehu. They ask the following question: Pesach shechtai b'shar yemei shana. If you shechted a korban Pesach on any other day of the year, meaning Rashi points out here, you picked an animal months before Pesach and you said, "This is going to be my korban Pesach." So you makdish this animal. It already now has kedushas korban Pesach. You said this is going to be used as my korban Pesach. V'kem alon, and the Gemara is going to tell us later on, says Rashi, on Daf Ayin Beis, the kaim alon de kasher lishlamim be'pirkin l'kamer, that if a person were to be makdish an animal as a korban Pesach, and then wanted to use it during the rest of the year, something else that I want to use for korban Pesach, this animal I want to use as a shlamim. So the din is v'im shachta lePesach. If you shechted it on a Tuesday in Cheshvan as a korban Pesach, that's possible. Delav's money, because it's not time for korban Pesach. Korban Pesach is only a meaningful and relevant thing to do on Erev Pesach. V'il l'shem shlamim shachta kosher. But if you said, you know what, I'm going to shecht this as a shlamim, that is going to be kosher. Says Rashi v'hechet de shachta lishmai v'shlo lishmai mahu. And the question that the Gemara is now going to ask us is what happens if you shechted this animal, continuing, apropos to our conversation from yesterday, what happens if you shechted this both lishmai v'shelo lishmai? You shechted this with intention and with intention for a korban Pesach and with intention for a shlamim. So if it's Erev Pesach and you're supposed to be shechting a korban Pesach, the Mishnah had told us that if you shechted a lishmai, shelo lishmai, or shelo lishmai v'lishmai, either which way, then we debated whether it's only according to Rabbi Yossi or even according to Rabbi Meir. Either which way, it says the Mishnah, it is going to be possible. But the opposite din now applies, because if you are talking about a Tuesday in Cheshvan that you decided that you wanted to shecht, something that you had declared to be a korban Pesach, so if you shechted with the intention of it being a korban Pesach, then it's going to be possible. And if you shechted it with the intention that it's going to be a shlamim, then it's going to be kosher. The question now is, what happens if you shechted it with the intention of both as a korban Pesach and as a korban shlamim? So that is the Gemara's question here. Pesach that was shechted all the other days of the year, lishmai v'shelo lishmai, for its sake and not for its sake. Mahu, what is that din? Mi asi shelo lishmai. Do we then say that the shelo lishmai comes along and takes it out from being a lishmai, and now it's kosher? We said no, meaning it was shechted lishmai as a korban Pesach and as a korban shlamim. So a korban shlamim would mean that it is kosher, even though it's a korban Pesach. But if it was shechted lishmai as a korban Pesach, now you can't use it as a shlamim anymore, and the whole thing is going to be possible. Ki aser Rav Dimi, when Rav Dimi came from Eretz Yisrael, Rav Dimi was one of the Amoraim that traveled from Eretz Yisrael to Bavel, and Bavel to Eretz Yisrael. Ki aser Rav Dimi, when Rav Dimi came back to Bavel, Amari says, lishmata kamed Rabbi Yirmiyah. I said over this question in front of Rabbi Yirmiyah, and I argue the following, says Rav Dimi. Since lishmai is good during its time, meaning Erev Pesach, you shechted the korban Pesach for the sake of korban Pesach. Amazing. And if it would be a Tuesday in Cheshvan and you decided that you wanted to shecht it as a korban shlamim, meaning shelo lishmai, that's good. All good and well. Ma lishmai hamachshir bismanei, and lishmai is good in its time. Ein motzim midei shelo lishmai doesn't detract from it fundamentally being disqualified from a shelo lishmai, meaning ma lishmai machshir bismanei, the lishmai, the intention of having it as a lishmai, that's machshir in its right time. Ein motzim midei shelo lishmai doesn't take it out, doesn't detract from it being shelo lishmai if it were to be at another time. Av shelo lishmai hamachshir shelo bismanei, shelo lishmai, which is the machshir in its time, and motzia midei lishmai upasul. It's not going to detract it, meaning it's not going to be able to undo the lishmai. and it's possible. Meaning, says the Rav Dimi to Rav Yirmiyah, basically all that we're doing is we're switching it. The correct intention is Shelo Lishma now. That, and the same way that a Lishma works on Erev Pesach, and if it would be Shelo Lishma on Erev Pesach, wouldn't work. Now we're just going to flip it. We're going to say Shelo Lishma on a Tuesday in Cheshvan works, and the fact that you said that you wanted to be Lishma, that's going to be exactly the same as if it was Shelo Lishma on Erev Pesach, and therefore it's going to be possible. Va'amarli, and then Rav Dimi says, he's giving testimony of this encounter when he came back to Babel. Amarli, Rav Yirmiyah said to him, lie, no, not at all. With regards to the case of a Shelo Lishma, Shekenu Noeg B'chol Hazvachim, which is a din that applies to all karbanos. All karbanos. If you shechted them, Shelo Lishma, it's not going to be kosher. Tamer B'Lishma, Sheken Eino Noeg B'chol Hazvachim, El B'Pesach Bilvad. What are you going to say if it is shechted for its own purpose? Sheken Eino Noeg B'chol Hazvachim, which doesn't apply to all of the korbanos. B'Pesach Bilvad, it only applies to the case of a korban Pesach. Meaning, we have the strange din of a korban Pesach that if it's shechted Shelo Lishma, it's going to be kosher if it's in the wrong time. Meaning, two wrongs in this case make a right. So Rav Yirmiyah says back to Rav Dimi, he says, I don't get it. You want to say that Shelo Lishma is now Lishma and Lishma is Shelo Lishma, but Shelo Lishma in general, that's Noeg B'chol Hazvachim, that applies to all other din. If you shechted a chatas as an ola and an ola as a shlam, none of that works. So Torah Lishma, now that you have this intention that I want it to be Lishma, which is the correct intention, Sheken Eino Noeg B'chol Hazvachim. This doesn't exist in all other zvachim. Meaning this din of Lishma. It only exists here by Korban Pesach. So my Have Allah, what would we say about this? So meaning he rejects Rav Dimi's svara. Rav Dimi wants to say that the same din that would apply to Lishma would apply to Shelo Lishma. He says, no, this is too strange a halacha. You can't compare these things. So he says, my Have Allah. So what is the resolution to the question? If you shechted it Shelo Lishma v'Lishma on a Tuesday in Cheshvan. Amar Rava explains as follows. Pesach sheshachted b'shal Yom HaShoshana, and Pesach will be shechted any other day of the year. Lishma v'Shelo Lishma, with intention and without, and with intention for Korban Pesach, with the intention for Shlam, two contradictory intentions. Kosher, it's going to be kosher. Zog Rava, that's the psak. Daha stamay lishmai kai. What's the svara? Because a stam korban pesach, meaning the animal that you picked out to be a korban pesach, you said this is going to be a korban pesach. Good. What happens if you didn't think about it at all until you shechted it? So at the point in time that you shechted it, if you didn't have any other ulterior intention, well then the stam intention of this animal is it continues to be a korban pesach. So he says, Das Tome Lishmai Kai. It is obviously, in general, going to be Lishmai. And even so, Ki Shachit Le Shelo Lishmai, when it is shechted Shelo Lishmai, with the intention for it to be a Shlamim, Kasher. It is going to be Kasher. Alma, what comes out from this? Asi Shelo Lishmai, that the intention of having a Shelo Lishmai comes along, Umafik Le Midei Lishmai, and undoes its status of being Lishmai. Meaning, it's Lishmai from the day that you are makdish it to be a Korban Pesach until the point in time that you then say, I don't want this to be a Korban Pesach anymore, I want it to be a Shlamim. Which means that the intention of Shelo Lishmai will undo the intention of Lishmai. Ki shachid nami Lishmai v'Shelo Lishmai. And the same thing would be true if you shechted it, Lishmai v'Shelo Lishmai. Meaning, the Lishmai is a neutral, is a zero. What happens if you shechted it, Lishmai v'Shelo Lishmai is already there. The Lishmai has always been there. The chiddush here is that there is a Shelo Lishma, and the Shelo Lishma is now coming to undo the thing that you had before. Meaning the Shelo Lishma is a much more powerful kavanah. That's effectively what Rabbi is saying, because it can undo the previous kavanah. And the Lishma is just a Lishma on top of a Lishma, which is irrelevant. So it's Ati Shelo Lishma, Mavile Midei Lishma. In this case as well, the Shelo Lishma is going to come along and is going to undo the Lishma that was beforehand. Because having the intention of Lishma is just overlapping on the previous intention of Lishma. It doesn't make any difference. It's not mal, it's not merit. It doesn't make any better or any worse. Says the Gemara, Amali Rav Adabar Ava Rav Adabar Ava challenges Rav. He says, I don't understand you, Rav. He says, Dil Meshani Hacha, maybe this is all different. The Amar, because I can say Shani Hechad Amar. There's a big difference, Hechad Amar, where a person said something, Hechad Amar, from where a person didn't say something. How does this work? And this is something that we already contemplated beforehand. When we say that you are shechting it lishmai v'shelo lishmai, is that a kavana or is that a statement? Is that happening in your mind or is that happening verbally? When you decided you were going to make this animal a Korban Pesach, you said so verbally. You said, I'm make this as a Korban Pesach, which is why we saw already earlier in the Perek Makim Shnagu, you shouldn't call this a Pesach, because it's going to look like you're making it into a Korban Pesach. So that the verbal statement of this is a Korban Pesach, that is going to make it into a Korban Pesach. The intention that you have Shelo Lishmai or Lishmai, is that verbal or is that simply something that's happening in your mind? So he says, Shani Hechad the Amar, Mehechad the Lei Amar. It says around the Barava, there's a difference here. Let's contemplate this. We're going to see this later on. You have a din that if you shechted the Korban Pesach le'oichlav, for those that are going to be eating it, and for those who are not able to eat it, meaning an orel or a tameh, kosher, that Korban Pesach is going to be kosher. But if you only were to shecht it for the intention of people that could not eat it, like an orel or a tameh, puzzle, there it's going to be puzzle. He says, va'amai, and why? Let's ask a question on that then. Every Korban Pesach is the Korban Pesach, the default Korban Pesach is la'ichlav, is for the people that are going to be able to eat it. But there's a big difference about what you said. If you didn't say it, hachinami, so too here also shani. If you said that this is shelo lishmai, if you didn't say, meaning he says, I agree with you, Rava. I agree with you. If you only thought in your mind that this is shelo lishmai, so the intention shelo lishmai is going to pull it out from being lishmai v'shelo lishmai, meaning and you'd be able to use it. But what happens if you said that this is lishmai v'shelo lishmai? This is for a Korban Pesach and a Korban Shlamim. Is that the same thing as doubling up the intention? So he says it would seem to not be the case. Says Amar Lei, Rava said back to him, Midi area, is this really a good raya that you bring? Is this a good proof? Bishlam Hasam, it makes good sense there with regards to the question of Oichlav and Shelo Oichlav. So long as he didn't uproot the intention that he had when he was shechting the Korban, meaning at the point in time that he was shechting the Korban, what was he intending? Stami vade lishmeikai, because he was suddenly the stam understanding is that he was shechting it for the sake of Korban Pesach. Elahachabet, yeah, stami la'oichlav. The stam is that it's for the people that are going to be eating it. Dilma, but and there's no stam there. Why? Dilma mimshechihani. Maybe those people, up until the point in time that you shechted the Korban Pesach, maybe those people are going to disappear. Va'asi achrini umimne ilavei. And there will be more people that will say, I want to be part of this Korban Pesach. Meaning, until the Korban Pesach is shechted, you can switch around that group. So la'ochlav v'shelo la'ochlav is a fungible group of people. It's not the same thing as lishmai v'shelo lishmai. Lishmai is a din. That's a fundamental. That doesn't change at all. You can't compare something that says Rava back to Rav Rava. You cannot compare something that is a definite, that doesn't change at all unless you actively change it, from something that is always changing all the time. The subset of people that are called Ochlav, that changes all the time. Which means that if you had in mind so that's going to be good, because that can always be changing. Unless you exclusively had in mind people that are Shelo Ochlav, that's where it would be possible. But yeah, who's going to say that this has got something to do with saying or not saying? That is simply a question of what's in your mind, and it's not the same as the question of Oichlav v'Shelo Oichlav. That's so he says Ditnan, because we have a brisa, we have a Mishnah that's going to tell us soon. That you can add people and take people away from the group They withdraw their hands from it. They say, we're not involved in the Korban Pesach until the Korban Pesach is shechted. So this question now is left unresolved. We don't know what the din is, whether if you have a Korban Pesach that is lishmai v'shelo lishmai on any other day of the year. We don't know how to answer the question. Another question. They ask the question as follows. You have a Korban Pesach that's shechted every other day of the year. B'shinei balim, and there's a change of ownership, meaning the kohen that shechted it for the sake of somebody other than the original people that were makdishas. So, Mahu, what is the din in such a case? Do we say shinei balim kishinei kodesh dami? Do we say that the changing of ownership is the same as changing the kedusha of this korban? And therefore, it would be kosher. Meaning, shinei balim means that you are shechting a different korban, and that this is not a korban pesach anymore. And since it's not a korban pesach, it is now going to default to a korban shlamim, and therefore it's going to be kosher. Or not? Do we say no? You changed the ownership of it, but you didn't then. Changing of ownership doesn't automatically change it into a korban shlamim. So Amar of Papa says, I said this question in front of Rava, and then I said the following svara. Since changing it from a Pesach to a Shlamim on Erev Pesach would puzzle it, because it needs to be a Pesach, it cannot be a Shlamim. And change of ownership would also puzzle it, would make it invalid if it was Erev Pesach, if you change the ownership of it. It says, changing of its status from a Pesach to a Shlamim, which puzzles it on Erev Pesach, is machshiret any other day of the year. Av shinei balim, so too we should say that shinei balim should puzzle bismana, that is going to puzzle it in its time on Erev Pesach, machshir la'achas mana, that would make it kosher any other day of the year. Va'amarli, and Rava said to me, we have a similar kind of story as the story by Rav Dimi before. Va'amarli, and Rava said to me, Loi, not at all. The reason that you have a Shinei Kodesh that now changes it from a Pesach to a Shlom is because there's she can possibly gufa. Now that is the korban itself is now a psul within this korban. It's a psul haguf. Intrinsically, it's possible. And this exists in all four of the avodas, meaning in each of the avodas of shchita, of kabbalah, of halacha, and zrika. In all of those cases, this is now going to be possible. Rashi says, shachar kibel damai, etc. Shaloi lishmai possible. Any of these things shaloi lishmai is possible. V'chol arba avodas dam. In all of the four avodas involving the blood, yalfin leila posla. We know at the beginning of Zvachim that a psul in any of those avodas is going to puzzle the whole thing. Shchita mi zevach Pesach, she is v'chasel l'shem Pesach, v'shar avodas mi v'asisa Pesach, she you call asiyasel l'shem Pesach, and the Gemara learns, it learns up the drasha that the shchita has to be l'shem Pesach, and all of the other avodas have to be for the sake of Pesach as well. Meaning, Rava's response back to Rav Papa is the reason that it is puzzle is because of psul haguf, and that psul haguf could kick in if you mess up at any point in the Arba Avodas. V'yeshna la'achar misa, and this is also la'achar misa. This is also after the death of the owner. V'yeshna b'tzibur, and this is in a case of a tzibur. So this is a korban tzibur kevi yachid, just like. It's a korban tzibur, just like it is by a korban yachid. Meaning, it applies. It says Rashi says meis benai, meis of the guy that originally owns it. Benai may be korban aviv. The father dies. The son has to bring this korban. It's in his estate, and it was niskadish to be a korban. So v'im shachtar shalol lishmai, shachtar not for its sake, it didn't work. And the estate of the person that has died has to pay up a korban. It says, and you have to bring another korban. And it has the din of a korban tzibur korban yachid. So says the Gemara, this is Rava's response back. He says, so would you really say the same thing about the change of ownership? He says, it's not a intrinsic psul in the guf of the animal. And Shin Balim is not problematic in all four of the avodas. And if there's a Shin Balim, it doesn't when the owner dies, the korban is no longer a korban, and if it's offered by somebody else, then that's going to be mutter, meaning Shin Balim. That not a problem. It says and it doesn't apply the same dinim of a korban tzibur to a korban yachid. It says v'afal gav the tarti lav dafka, and even though these two are not necessarily so, tarti mia dafka, two of them are necessarily so. The ma'ishna shina balim, the loy have a psul begufa, the psuloi machshav be'almahi. The psul haguf is only a psul in your thoughts. Shina kodesh nami. And Shin Kodesh, changing the Kedusha from a Pesach to a Shalom to a Pesach, that's a Shin Kodesh, is B'sula B'achshav B'almahi. Also only applies in your mind. He says, V'tu, and furthermore, Had the Amr Shin Ba'alim, that which you said, change of ownership, in L'achar Misa, doesn't exist after a person dies. Says the Rav Pinchas, B'reid Rav Ami the Amr, according to Rav Pinchas, the son of Rav Ami, that said that there is a change of ownership after death. My Memo, what are you going to say? Then these two things are both necessarily the case. So he rejects the whole rationale. He says, Ella Amar Rava says, Pesach any other day of the year, Bishin and Balim, with a change of ownership, it is as if it was shechted as if it didn't have owners at its right time and puzzle, and it's going to be puzzle. It's not going to work. Meaning the svara that Papa wanted to say that Shinui Kodesh is the same as Shinui Balim. Says Rava, we reject that summary. It doesn't make sense at all, and if a person would do so, that would puzzle it. So, sorry, we went a couple of lines into Samach Aleph Amud Aleph just to be able to follow along with that whole argument. We will continue from the Mishnah tomorrow. Everybody should have Shavua Tov, and we will see you then.